This is the Mercedes-Benz EQB, and believe it or not, it is one of the rarest electric cars you can buy in Australia right now. That's because it's the only electric SUV that starts below 100 grand and has the option of 7 seats. Yeah, might be a bit of a niche claim to fame, but if you're after an EV SUV that's more practical than its rivals, hang around, because in this video, we're gonna have a detailed look around the design of the car, check out the strengths and weaknesses of the interior, talk ride, handling, and recharging times, and then see how it measures up, quite literally, against its competitor set. If you're watching us on YouTube, all of the time codes are in the description below, so let's get into it. The EQB is the third electric SUV that Mercedes has launched in Australia so far. And just like the EQC and the EQA that it follows, it's not a bespoke EV. It shares its underpinnings with the regular GLB, and that means it has a few shortcomings when compared with rivals like the Tesla Model Y, the Volkswagen ID.4, and even something like the Hyundai Ioniq 5. There are two variants of the EQB to choose from, and prices start at $87,800 for the single motor EQB 250 and stretch to $106,700 for the sportier twin motor EQB 350 that we're testing here. Both cars use the same 66 kilowatt-hour battery pack nestled between the axles, and the claimed range of the EQB 250 is 371 kilometers, while the more powerful 350 can travel 360 k's on a full charge. Now, those prices and the range don't actually compare that favorably to the EQB's key competitors, so I'm going to throw up a table on screen now so you can see exactly what the difference is. Let's talk about how the EQB looks, and we'll start at the front because that's probably where it's most different to the GLB upon which it's based. The first thing you notice is how different the front grille is. It's got all this piano black on it and it's been completely blanked off. Actually, because there's no combustion engine underneath the bonnet, the whole front of the car basically has also been blanked off, including these air vents down here in the lower section of the bumper. Mercedes says that's actually helped to make the front of the car slipperier through the air. And the CD of the EQB is actually 0.28, which is an improvement over the GLB. You also score LED headlights as standard, and there's a continuous light strip, of course, being an electric Mercedes-Benz. Looks a little bit like a milk mustache to me. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Another telltale sign that this is an electric SUV, not one powered by petrol, is the headlights have this blue highlight here inside the lens itself. Around the side, the EQB's profile is pretty much identical to a GLB, but you do score an EQB badge here on the front quarter panel, and Aussie cars get AMG alloys as standard. They're 19 inches in the EQB 250, but this is the 350, so the wheel size grows to 20 inches as standard. But one thing that this angle of the EQB does allow you to do is check out one of its key strengths, and that is how long and how narrow its form factor is. That makes it easier to sneak through tight spaces in the city than most 7-seat SUVs, and you can also fit long items like surfboards and bikes into the tailgate really easily once you lay the back seats down. I'll throw up another table on screen right now so you can see exactly how this car measures up dimensionally and also for boot space against its key rivals. At the back, it's also quite different to the GLB upon which it's based. A GLB has the number plate here and the badge here, but in the EQB, we've now got a full width light bar and the Mercedes star has dropped down here where the number plate used to be. Number plate itself is now all the way down here in the lower section of the bumper, and this whole lower bumper has actually been restyled. And because this is the EQB 350, it gets AMG exterior styling as standard, so we score some more bits of chrome down here. As for the boot, an electric tailgate is standard, but exactly how much luggage capacity you get depends on how many seats your EQB has. In standard 5-seat trim, the boot capacity is 495 litres with the rear seats up and 1710 with the back seats down. But if you option for the third row of seats, which is only available on the EQB 250 and will cost you an additional $2,900, those figures drop down to $465 with the rear seats up and $1,620 with everything down. So you score some extra seats, which are roomy enough for adults to use occasionally, I'd say, but the compromise is that you lose a little bit in luggage capacity in the 7-seat version. Elsewhere in the boot, there's a netted section and a few elastic bands here which help for the loose items, and underneath the boot floor, there's some additional storage under there as well, where you can put charging cables, that kind of thing. There's no spare tire though, like a lot of electric cars, meaning that all you get is a compressor and a can of goo. Like most EVs, the EQB accepts both AC charging from a normal socket or a wall box at home, and also faster DC charging as well. If you find a normal socket at home and plug it in, it's going to take you a long time to charge your EQB, like 25 hours to get a full battery. Better yet though, if you have 3-phase and also an 11 kilowatt hour wall box, it'll take you about 6.5 hours to charge the battery in this car. If you can find a DC fast charger, the EQB can accept a charge rate of 100 kilowatts. And that means you can go from 10 to 80% in about 30 minutes. Don't have quite that long? Well, 15 minutes will get you about 150 k's of range. If you've sat in a regular GLB or even a Mercedes-Benz A-Class for that matter, then this cabin is going to be really familiar to you. You still get the same widescreen, twin screen digital dash here. That debuted a few years ago, but it's still a really nice piece of tech. The air vents are like turbines. You still get "Hey Mercedes" voice recognition, and the level of standard equipment across both models in the range is really impressive. I'll put a list up on screen now so you can see exactly what you get included as standard, but the key highlights are, as you'd expect, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Bit of a bummer though, they are wired still. I was kind of expecting wireless CarPlay at this price point, but you do score wireless charging here for your phone in the center console, and both front seats in both models are heated as well. In terms of general ambience and separation between the cheaper 250 and this flagship 350, both models actually feel pretty similar. Key differences are the 350 does get a slightly different seat design. Big one though is a panoramic sunroof is standard in the 350. You have to pay extra for that in the 250. And the 350 also gets a sportier steering wheel with a flat bottom design. There's lots of safety gear included as standard in both models as well. And another key strength is cabin storage. You get twin cup holders here in front of the center console. This middle bin here is actually quite deep, and the door bins themselves are also pretty roomy and can take care of big drink bottles, no problem at all. That's not to say that the cabin is perfect though. I think for me, the biggest issue is just perceived quality, because when you jump inside the car, it feels really premium, very luxurious, quite glitzy actually. But when you start to interact with some of the plastics and some of the touch points, it does feel a little bit cheap, a little bit thin in some places, and there is loads of piano black, which again, is a bit of a fingerprint magnet and just sort of erodes the initial sense of quality in here. Another minor bugbear for me is that even though both front seats are heated, they're not electrically adjustable, so you have to manually adjust your seats. I wonder if that's, a victim of the semiconductor shortage going on right now, and that might change in the future. But as it stands now, 100 grand for an electric SUV that doesn't have electric seats, I don't know, it feels a little bit stingy to me. Here in the second row, you'll discover it's actually surprisingly roomy. I'm sat behind my own driving position. I'm 6'2", 6'3", and I have loads of knee room, plenty of toe room, and of course, because the car is so narrow and tall, absolute acres of headroom. The windowsills are also nice and low, so visibility for kiddies back here is another big tick. And amenity-wise, we've got twin air vents back here. Again, very important if you have kids. There's a center armrest with a couple of cup holders here as well. There's only a single USB-C outlet though. That's a bit of a bummer. You've got kids back here, they're both going to be fighting over that to charge your iPads. It might be a bit of a drag on a long road trip. But in terms of general sense of space, ambience, it's actually quite nice back here. One quick thing to point out though is that we are in the flagship 350 and you cannot have the extra row of seats in this car at all. They're only available on the entry-level 250. Another compromise that brings is in the 7-seat version of this car, you also get a sliding second row, but you don't get that in the 350. So this seat is actually fixed. That means you can't vary the boot space with rear passenger space or anything like that. So this cabin actually isn't as flexible as you get in a 250, which is cheaper. So weirdly, the EQB is one of those odd cars where when you actually spend less, sometimes you get more. First impressions when you get the EQB on the move are it might actually be a more convincing thing to drive than a regular GLB. It's quiet, it's refined, the ride is surprisingly comfortable. We'll get to more about that in a minute. And because it's electric, acceleration and throttle response are really, really impressive. It does feel quite nippy, this car, for a big, optionally 7-seat SUV. And even though it's officially slower on paper than all of its key rivals, it's a really impressive thing to nip into gaps in traffic around town. And to be honest, we've driven both versions, the single motor version and the twin motor version. And in the city, you can't actually tell that much difference between them in terms of acceleration and performance. Where you do notice the benefit of the twin motor version is when you're out on the open road like we are now. It does have much stronger roll-on acceleration, and the overtaking performance in particular is much more reassuring in this twin motor EQB 350. Traction is another key strength of the EQB. We have had some weather down here in Victoria over the past week, and even though it's sunny today, yesterday when we were driving the car, it was absolutely torrential, like Noah's Ark kind of weather. And I've got to say, I was expecting a lot more wheel spin, a lot more torque steer than what this car actually had. It's actually very impressive how it gets its power to the road. And it is actually as quick against the stopwatch as Mercedes-Benz claims it is. I think the official claim for this twin motor version is 6.3 seconds to 100. And when we tested it against the stopwatch in wet conditions yesterday, it achieved 6.5 seconds. The biggest surprise, and possibly the biggest strength in how this car drives though, is the chassis setup that Merc's engineers have gone with. For me, it's a big improvement over a regular GLB, which can feel a little bit firm and has some issues around its ride comfort. In this car, maybe because it's got extra weight, or maybe they've just shifted the personality a little bit, but the trade-off between ride comfort and control is actually nicely judged. Adaptive dampers are standard, and even though we are on 20-inch wheels, I'd almost go so far as to say that most of the time, the ride is actually surprisingly supple. I don't know, it's just such a change for me coming from a GLB, which can feel a little bit stiff-legged, but the chassis setup in this car is far more convincing. It's actually surprisingly fun to drive as well. I'm not gonna go and say that it's, a hot hatch or anything like that, but this twin motor version in particular, which has more powerful roll-on acceleration, when you get it onto a twisty section of road, it's probably more fun and more convincing to drive for keen drivers than you'd expect of a big, heavy family SUV. Another thing to mention are the different levels of regen braking that are available. I think there's 4 all up. There is D, D+, and D-. So D is what the car comes to as a default, and there is a little bit of a regen effect there to play with. If you don't like regen, you can just pull the right shift paddle here behind the steering wheel, and that takes you to D+, which is basically like driving a conventional car with the clutch in. You get lots of coasting. If you do like some strong regen, pull the left paddle and you go down to D-. It is actually a pretty strong effect. It's not quite one pedal driving. It won't come to a complete stop, but it does have a very strong regen effect, and it really does help in the move and flow of city traffic. You can basically drive it as a one pedal. You just need to use the brake if you want to come to a complete stop. The final regen mode to mention is something called D Auto, which uses the adaptive cruise control system to basically pick the car up in front of you and judge the distance, and that actually dials up and dials back the regen automatically, which is a nice feature. So dynamically, there aren't actually that many chinks in the EQB's armour. Probably its biggest weakness is its shorter range compared to its key rivals, but in terms of how it goes, stops and steers, I think this car is actually a bit of a surprise, and it's certainly a more polished package than a regular GLB. So it's better to drive than a regular GLB, and there is plenty to like about the rich standard specification, the narrow and practical form factor, and the fact that you can option it with 7 seats. And to my mind, that actually makes the more affordable EQB 250 the variant to buy. In saying all of that, there's no escaping the fact that in several key areas, it's just not quite as convincing as its EV competitors that have more performance, more range, and they also offer better value as well. So would you still consider an EQB? Jump into the comments and let me know. And if there's a detail that I've missed or a question that you have, also jump into the comments and fire away. I'll jump in there and answer them as best I can.